Before we begin, I want you to forget everything you think you know about queens. Forget the ones in golden crowns who sit on velvet thrones and wave at crowds from high windows. Forget the ones in fairy tales who wait to be saved. Forget the ones history was kind enough to remember by name. The woman this story is about. History did not name her. History feared her. And there is a very significant difference. Her name, the name she carries now, is Moraine, the Black Queen of Vaeldreth, the Undying Verdict, the Angel of Death. She has been called all of these things. She has never corrected anyone. She stopped correcting people approximately 400 years ago. It stopped mattering. What matters, what has always mattered, is the work. And the work is almost finished. Which means, for the first time in 5 centuries, things are about to go catastrophically wrong. Chapter 1. What they say about the Black Queen. Let me tell you what they say about the Black Queen. They say she has never lost a battle. They say entire armies have turned and fled thousands of armed men, trained soldiers, veterans of 100 campaigns just from the sight of her banner on the horizon. A black field, no symbol, just darkness on fabric. That is enough. They say she has been killing kings since before your grandfather's grandfather drew his first breath. They say the ground frosts over when she walks across a battlefield, even in summer. They say that on the night before a major battle, ravens, thousands of them, circle her camp in silence, not cawing, not fighting, just circling, watching. They say she cannot die. That last part is almost true. She can die. She has died. More times than she has ever told anyone, in more ways than you would sleep comfortably knowing. Sword through the chest, arrow through the throat, poison in 3 different forms on 3 different continents. An entire fortress collapsed on top of her, once buried under 40 feet of stone and timber for 6 days before her soldiers dug her out. She was already awake when they reached her, sitting in the dark, waiting. The difference between Moraine and everything else that has ever lived is that nothing on this earth, or beneath it, or beyond the edge of what this world calls sky, has ever had the authority to make death stick. The kings of Vaeldreth call her a monster. The priests call her a demon wearing a human face. Her soldiers, the ones who have followed her across 100 campaigns, who have watched her fall and watched her rise and never once flinched, they call her something else. They call her mother. Not because she is soft, not because she coddles them, because in 500 years of war, she has never once sent a soldier somewhere she wouldn't go herself. Because she remembers every name, every single one. And on the anniversary of every battle, in the darkest hour of the night, when she thinks no one is watching, she whispers them, all of them, every soldier she has ever lost, going back 500 years. It takes her most of the night. Chapter 2. The World of Vaeldreth. Before we go further, the continent of Vaeldreth is a place that has forgotten it was once holy. Ruined cathedrals rise out of cursed forests like broken teeth, structures so ancient that the gods they were built to honor have been dead for longer than the concept of worship has existed. Rivers run black in certain seasons, and nobody alive remembers why, though the oldest texts suggest it has something to do with what sleeps beneath the mountains to the north. The mountains themselves. The priests call them the sleeping gods, because that is what they are. The remains of divine beings so enormous that when they fell, their bodies became geography. And on very quiet nights, in places where the stone is thinnest, something beneath them shifts. Vaeldreth has been at war with itself for as long as anyone can remember. Kingdoms rise and collapse. Kings make treaties over gold tables and break them before the candles burn down. Noble houses with names that stretch back 1,000 years quietly do terrible things in their basements, and smile at court in the morning. It is, in other words, a perfectly ordinary Gothic continent, except for one thing. For 500 years, through every war and every alliance and every upheaval, the Black Queen has remained. The kingdoms of Vaeldreth have tried everything. Armies, assassins, curses, purchased from witches at considerable expense. One particularly desperate king attempted to hire a god which tells you everything you need to know about how frightened they were and also about the king's understanding of how gods work. None of it has worked. She is still here, still in the black armor, still winning. And not one of them, not a single king or priest or general in 500 years, has stopped to ask the question that actually matters. Not what is she? Not how does she survive? But why? What does she want? What is she building toward? What is the endgame of a woman who cannot die and has been fighting for half a millennium? The answer, as with most things that matter, begins with a girl. A 17-year-old girl in a village called Thornwell, 500 years ago. Chapter 3. Aera before she became something else. Her name was Aera. Not Moraine, not the Black Queen, not the Undying Verdict, or the Angel of Death, or any of the names that history would eventually attach to her like armor. Just Aera, a girl from Thornwell. Thornwell was a small, unremarkable village on the southern edge of Vaeldreth, a scattering of stone houses and river traders and farmers who grew dark wheat in fields that smelled like rain even in dry seasons. Nothing of historical significance had ever happened there. Aera herself was unremarkable by every measure anyone might have thought to apply. No power, no destiny, no bloodline that anyone had marked down in any important text. She was 17 years old, and she kept a small garden of black flowers outside her window because everyone said they were unlucky, and she had always found that reasoning deeply unconvincing. She liked the way mornings smelled after rain. She was learning to read. She had never been more than 40 miles from home. Then the warlord Draven came. History knows Draven the Consuming as a conqueror. His campaigns across southern Vaeldreth are documented in every major archive. The number of kingdoms he absorbed, the treaties he forced, the wealth he accumulated. History is, as always, very interested in what powerful men took. History is considerably less interested in the cost. Draven's armies swept through Thornwell on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, there was no more Thornwell. Aera survived. She survived what they did to her. She survived the weeks that followed, hiding in the ruins of what used to be her home, eating what she could find, drinking rainwater from broken pottery. She survived by making herself very quiet and very cold inside, by taking the fury, which was enormous, world-swallowing, the kind of rage that could have unmade things if she'd had any power at all, and compressing it, packing it down smaller and smaller until it stopped feeling like fury, until it felt like architecture, like something she was building herself around. 9 months later, alone in the ruins of Thornwell, in the middle of winter with frost on every surface, she went into labor. She was too young, too malnourished, too far from any help. She held her daughter for approximately 4 minutes, long enough to see the child's eyes dark, already fierce, already somehow ancient looking for something that had existed for less than 5 minutes, long enough to whisper a name, Vessin. Then Aera died. Chapter 4. The Vale where the real story begins. The place between death and whatever comes after is not dark. This is the first thing that surprises most souls when they arrive. They expect darkness because darkness is what the living associate with endings. But the veil, the ancient boundary between existence and the void beyond it, is white. Vast and white and completely silent in a way that has weight, like the silence itself is a substance pressing against you from every direction. It does not feel peaceful. It feels like the moment before a verdict is delivered. And at the very edge of it, at the furthest boundary where existence ends and something else begins, there is the hollow throne. Not a figure, not a god with a face and a voice and robes. The hollow throne is exactly what it sounds like. An ancient seat of judgment carved from something that predates stone, predates matter, predates the concept of substance. It sits where the laws of the cosmos were first written, before the gods arrived, before light decided to exist, before warmth was invented. It does not speak in words. It speaks in something that arrives in your mind already translated, bypassing language entirely, arriving as pure meaning, as something between knowledge and memory. Aera stood before it, 17 years old, dead, still furious. The hollow throne told her what she was, what she had always been, written into her soul before her birth, encoded into the architecture of her existence by the first gods before they made their final sacrifice. The truth beneath the world. And beneath Vaeldreth, beneath the continent, beneath the roots of the sleeping god mountains, deeper than anything with a name, something is sealed. The first gods called it the Starless One. It is not a demon. It is not a monster. Those are categories that require a frame of reference, something to compare against, something that exists in contrast to goodness or order or life. The Starless One predates contrast. It existed before the concept of light, which means it also existed before the concept of darkness, before warmth, which means before cold, before something, which means before nothing. It is a consciousness that was here before the universe decided to be a universe, and it remembers what came before, and it wants to return. The first gods, beings of extraordinary power who shaped the laws of existence in the early ages of the world, recognized what it was. Recognized that if it woke fully, if it remembered itself completely, there would be nothing left of everything they had built. So they made a seal. A prison built not of stone or magic, but of pure law, woven into the fabric of existence itself, as fundamental as gravity, as absolute as time. And then they poured themselves into it, every last one. They didn't die, they dissolved. They became part of the barrier. They knew the seal would fracture eventually. Matter degrades, laws erode, even the most fundamental things, given enough time, develop cracks. So, before they dissolved, they did one more thing. They designed a soul, a single human soul, encoded with the specific resonance needed to find the fractures, reinforce them, and hold the prison together until a permanent solution could be found. They placed that soul into the cycle of human lives, waiting to be born. That soul was Aera's. She was never supposed to die at 17, in the ruins of Thornwell. Draven's armies had interrupted the design. Cruelty. Ordinary, mundane, human cruelty had broken something cosmic, and while Aera had been dying in the cold, the seal had fractured 3 more times. The hollow throne made her an offer. Return. Carry the verdict. Find the fragments of the seal. Reinforce them. Hold the prison together until the work was complete. It did not tell her how long it would take. It did not tell her what happened when it was finished. Aera was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My daughter breathes. That is my condition. Not a request, not a prayer, a condition. Vessin lives healthy, safe, with people who will love her properly. You guarantee that, whatever guarantee means at the edge of existence. And then yes, whatever you need, however long it takes, as many times as I have to die and wake up and do it again. I agree to all of it." The hollow throne was silent for what felt like centuries. Then, the child lives. You carry the verdict. You carry it alone. Attachment fractures the seal. Every time you allow yourself to love something, the prison weakens. You must remain apart from everything you feel until the work is finished. Aera said, "And when the work is finished?" The Hollow Throne did not answer that question. She agreed anyway. She woke in the ruins of Thornwell. Winter. Ice on every surface. The sky, the particular shade of gray that comes just before dawn. Her daughter was alive on her chest, breathing, eyes open, already looking at her like she knew exactly what had just happened and had opinions about it. Aera held Vessin for 1 hour. She memorized everything. The weight, the warmth, the sound of breathing, the way tiny fingers curled around one of hers without being asked. Then she found a farmhouse, 2 miles east, a couple older, childless, kind-faced, and she left Vessin on their doorstep wrapped in the only clean cloth she had. She watched from the tree line until the door opened, until she heard the woman make a sound, not fear, not alarm, wonder, pure wonder, until she saw the light from inside spill out across the snow and Vessin disappear into it. Then she turned away, and she never let herself look back. Chapter 5. The Undying Verdict, What It Costs Her. The ability the Hollow Throne placed inside Aera inside Moraine. She chose the name herself in the 2nd year, because Aera was a girl who had a garden, and a mother, and a home, and that girl deserved to stay buried somewhere nothing could touch her. Is not called immortality. The priests who study her from a distance call it a curse. Her soldiers call it a blessing. She calls it a debt. Its true name, carved into the fabric of existence itself, is the Undying Verdict. Here is what it means. Every time Moraine is killed, and she has been killed many times, in many ways her soul races back from the veil faster than her body can cool. Not slowly, not peacefully, not like waking from sleep. Like being pulled back through a door that keeps slamming shut and dragged across a threshold that was not designed for repeated crossing. It hurts. Every time. 500 years of dying and coming back, and it has never once stopped hurting. She has simply become very good at not showing it. And she feels every death. Every single one. She remembers them all. She keeps them in a part of herself that she has walled off carefully, like a room she passes but does not enter. The visual, and this is what makes armies freeze when they witness it. When Moraine wakes after death, the ground around her body frosts over, even in summer heat. The air shifts not to cold exactly, but to something that has no temperature, something that exists between states. The engravings on her black armor begin to glow. Not light exactly, something behind light, the color of a sky with no stars seen through water. And then her eyes open. And for just a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, before she is fully back, before the veil has finished releasing her, you can see through her eyes into it. Anyone who looks directly into her eyes in that moment sees their own death. Not how, not when, just the fact of it. The absolute, inevitable, written in existence certainty that they will end. Most people only need to see it once. After that, they tend to look somewhere else when she wakes. Chapter 6. Sorvane, the man they sent to kill her. His name is Sorvane. He is the last surviving heir of the Ashvale priesthood, an ancient order founded in the early ages of the world, when the first gods were still present and still occasionally answerable to questions. The Ashvale were not warriors. They were not kings. They were scholars of the boundary, trained to read the architecture of existence the way other people read texts, to find fractures, to document anomalies, to watch for anything that might threaten the fundamental laws. The Ashvale priesthood is mostly extinct now, hunted down over centuries by kingdoms who feared what they knew. Sorvane survived by hiding what he was. He is lean and dark-haired and quiet in a way that makes rooms feel smaller, not because he takes up space, but because his attention takes up space. When Sorvane looks at something, he reads it. Everything. The way someone holds their shoulders, the specific quality of their silence, whether their eyes track left or right when they're remembering versus constructing. He carries no conventional weapon. He doesn't need one. An Ashvale priest at full power can reach into the spiritual architecture of a living thing and find the thread that connects it to existence, and simply untether it. He has used this ability exactly 3 times in his life. He does not think about those 3 times if he can help it. The coalition of terrified kings found him 6 months ago. They offered him a number so large it would have been insulting if it weren't so clearly an act of desperation. They wanted the Black Queen dead, permanently, actually, in a way that stuck. He took the contract because he needed access to their archives. He had been searching for something his entire life, a gap in the ancient Ashvale texts that described the veil, a shape, an absence. Like a piece had been removed from the boundary of existence itself and placed somewhere else. The king's archives were the oldest in Vaeldreth. If the answer was anywhere, it was there. He found it, or rather he found enough of it to understand what he was looking for. And then he came to find the Black Queen, expecting a monster. Expecting someone drunk on power and centuries of unchecked conquest. He arrived at her camp in the small hours of the morning, having slipped past 8 layers of sentries through methods that would have impressed even her most experienced soldiers if any of them had noticed. He found her alone in her war tent, sitting at a campaign table covered in maps. Maps covered in symbols that made his Ashvale training scream not in warning, but in recognition. Those symbols were in the oldest texts. The ones so old they predated human language. The ones that described the seal. She did not look up when he entered. She said, "You're Ashvale. I haven't seen one of you in about 200 years. Sit down. We don't have much time." Sorvane sat down. He had not planned to sit down. He had planned considerably more drama than this. But something in her voice, not the authority, not the age hidden inside it, something else. Something exhausted, in a way that made exhaustion sound like a choice she had made and kept making for 5 centuries. Made his prepared entrance feel very small. He sat down, and she told him everything. Chapter 7. What Sorvane Found When He Read Her Soul. He listened for 3 hours. Moraine spoke the way she did everything directly, without performance, with the particular economy of someone who had been alive long enough to find ornamentation wasteful. She told him about the seal, about the Starless One, about the fracture points she had located and reinforced over 5 centuries, about the ones she hadn't reached yet, about how much time they had left. Not much, she said. Months, not years. The Starless One was waking faster now. It could feel her. It had been feeling her for decades, pressing at the cracks from the inside, testing the places where her attention couldn't reach. She told him she needed an Ashvale priest. She had needed one for 200 years. She had been managing without one, but managing was no longer going to be sufficient. When she finished, Sorvane said, "I need to read you." She looked at him for a long moment. Dark eyes. The particular quality of attention she had that felt like being assessed by something very old and very patient. Then she said, "I know what you'll find," he said. "I need to find it anyway." She nodded. Sorvane reached out with his Ashvale gift, the ability to perceive the spiritual architecture of living things, to read the laws written into the fabric of their existence. He had read hundreds of souls. He thought he understood what he would find. He was not prepared. Most souls are when you can read them like rooms, complex, layered, full of history and intention and choice, but recognizably rooms, bounded, human in their shape. Moraine's soul was not a room. It was a a door built into the architecture of existence itself, not attached to the veil, but woven through it, threaded through the fundamental laws, the way load-bearing walls are threaded through a building. Remove it, and nothing falls immediately. But the structure becomes unstable. And then he understood the gap, the absence in the Ashvale texts, the shape he had been looking for his entire life. The gap was her. She had been removed from the boundary of existence and placed into a human life. She was not defying the laws of death. She was one of them. One of the actual, fundamental, load-bearing laws of the cosmos, walking around in armor, fighting wars, keeping the world from ending while the world called her its greatest villain. Sorvane pulled back from the reading. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I said the timer on. How long have you been doing this alone?" Morian looked at her maps. 512 years. Sorvane said, "That ends tonight." She looked at him then, really looked at him. And for a moment, just a moment, something moved behind her eyes that wasn't the veil, and wasn't the verdict, and wasn't 5 centuries of careful armor. Something human. Something that had been waiting, very quietly, for a very long time, to hear exactly those words. Then it was gone, and she handed him a map and pointed to the nearest fracture point. "We move at dawn. Get some sleep." He did not sleep. He spent the rest of the night going through his texts, specifically the ones about her bloodline, specifically the ones about who Vessin became, and who her children became, and their children, and theirs. He found what he was looking for just before the sun came up. He sat very still for a long time after. Then he looked up at the war tent where Moraine was already awake, already studying her maps, already calculating the next 5 moves in a game she had been playing for 500 years. And he understood something that she did not yet know. The woman he had come to kill, the woman who was one of the fundamental laws of existence, the woman who had left her daughter on a farmhouse doorstep 5 centuries ago and turned away and never looked back, was his ancestor. Sorvane was a descendant of Vessin. The Black Queen had been unknowingly protecting her own bloodline for 500 years. And the gods or whatever had arranged this had sent her own blood to find her. He decided not to tell her, not yet, not until they had finished the work. But he looked at her hands on the maps, steady, certain. 5 centuries of practice, and he thought about a 17-year-old girl in the ruins of a village who had made the most devastating bargain in the history of existence. Not for power, not for survival, for her daughter. He thought, "You kept your end. Every day for 500 years, you kept your end. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, I am going to make sure someone keeps theirs." Chapter 8. The cost of feeling why she cannot love him. It happens slowly. That is the thing about Sorvane. He does not announce himself. He does not perform. He simply appears, consistently, in the spaces she thought were too small for anyone else to fit. He is there when she wakes before dawn with the weight of 500 years pressing down, and he hands her tea without asking, and opens a map and says nothing until she is ready to speak. He is there after battles not to congratulate her on the victory, but to sit quietly with the cost of it while she whispers the names. He learned all the names, not because she asked. He just learned them, so she wouldn't have to carry them alone. He falls for her the way water finds cracks in stone, quietly, persistently, without announcement, not for her power, not for her legend, for the woman who still remembers the name of every soldier she has lost going back 5 centuries, for the girl underneath 500 years of armor who kept a garden of black flowers because she thought the idea of unlucky flowers was unconvincing. Moraine notices. She is 500 years old. She notices everything, and the seal cracks. Not dramatically. Not all at once, Just a hairline fracture where there wasn't one before. A place where the prison wall is fractionally thinner. A place where the starless one presses its attention, drawn to the warmth like a hand finding heat through glass. She knows what it means. She has always known. She spent 500 years avoiding exactly this. She let people in exactly far enough to be useful, and not 1 inch further. She has been alone genuinely, completely, cosmically alone for 5 centuries on purpose. Not because no one ever cared, because she cared enough to keep them at a distance. She sits down across from Sorvane one evening, 2 weeks into their partnership, 3 days after she noticed the new fracture, and she tells him everything. The claws, what attachment costs, what warmth does to the seal, what the starless one does with the heat of feeling. She tells him the way she tells him everything directly, without performance, watching his face. He is quiet for a long time. Then he says, "So every person you ever cared about you pushed away. To keep them safe. To keep the seal intact." She says, "Yes," he says, "and you've been doing this for 500 years. Alone." She says, "The work requires it." He looks at her. That particular quality of attention he has, the reading, the seeing through. He says, "The work also required an Ashvale priest, and you managed 200 years without one. You are very good at deciding what the work requires when the alternative is letting someone close enough to matter." She has no answer for that. He says, "I'm not going anywhere. I know what it costs you. I know what it does to the seal. I'm telling you anyway. I'm not going anywhere. Figure out what to do with that." He gets up and goes back to his texts. Moraine sits alone in the dark for a long time, somewhere beneath the world, in a prison older than light. The starless one feels the warmth and smiles in the way that something without a face smiles, and presses. Chapter 9. The Ruins of Calderhall. They left at dawn, exactly as Moraine had promised, riding north along the river road with 4 soldiers she trusted enough to bring within sight of a fracture point, which was to say, 4 soldiers out of an army of thousands, because trust at that particular level was not something she extended easily. Sorvane rode beside her. He had expected, somehow, that she would be a difficult traveling companion, imperious, distant, performing the legend even in private. Instead, she asked him questions about the Ashvale texts, about what he'd found in the king's archives, about whether the gap in their oldest records had a shape or just an absence. He found himself answering more honestly than he'd planned to. There's a section in the 3rd archive pre-collapse era, before even the Ashvale existed, as an order that describes the Vale as having a door, not metaphorically. The text uses an architectural term, a door that opens inward only, that was removed and relocated. The scholars who wrote it thought it was corrupted text, a copying error. Moraine was quiet for a moment. "It isn't a copying error." "No," said Sorvane. "It isn't." Neither of them said anything else about it for the rest of the ride. Calderhall. The ruins of Calderhall had once been a monastery, one of the last outposts of the old religion. Abandoned 300 years ago when the kingdoms that funded it collapsed into the wars that eventually birthed the current order of things. Now it was just stone, broken arches reaching up into a gray sky, a bell tower with no bell, weeds growing through what used to be a chapel floor. Sorvane felt the fracture before he saw it. It registered the way a missing tooth registers to a tongue, an absence with edges, a wrongness with a specific shape. "There," he said, pointing toward the collapsed chapel, "under the altar stone." Moraine nodded. She had already known. She had known the moment they crossed into the valley the particular cold that lived in her chest whenever she got close to a fracture point, like carrying a piece of winter under her ribs. She dismounted and walked toward the chapel alone. "Wait here," she told the soldiers. They didn't argue. They never argued. They simply found defensive positions and waited, the way men wait who have learned that some battles are not theirs to fight. Sorvane followed her in. "I said, wait here," she said, without turning around. "You said it to them. I'm the one who can read what's actually wrong with the seal. You need me in there." She stopped at the threshold of the ruined chapel and looked back at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "It isn't safe," she said finally. Not bravado, not a warning meant to test him. A simple fact, offered plainly. Neither was riding north with the woman every kingdom in Vaeldreth wants dead. "I made my peace with unsafe a while ago." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile passed over her face. It was gone almost before it arrived. "Fine," she said. "Stay close, and whatever you see under that altar, don't touch it." The altar stone had cracked down the center, a fissure running through granite that should have taken 1,000 years of weathering to produce, and had clearly happened in a single instant, decades ago, when this particular fracture point had first opened. Beneath it, visible through the crack, was not darkness. It was the absence of the concept that darkness exists to contrast against. Sorvane's Ashvale training had words for almost everything. It did not have words for this. He understood, looking into it, why the old texts had simply called it the Starless Reach and left it at that, because language itself seemed to recoil from the edges of the thing, the way water finds it impossible to wet certain surfaces. "Don't look at it directly," Moraine said quietly. "Not for too long. It remembers being looked at. It likes being looked at." Sorvane forced his eyes to the edges of the fissure, instead to the architecture of the crack itself, which was, after all, his actual area of expertise. "The fracture pattern is wrong," he said. "This isn't decay. Something pushed from the inside. It's been pushing from the inside for 300 years. This is just the first place it broke through." She knelt at the edge of the altar stone and placed both palms flat against the cracked granite. What she did next had no elegant name. The old texts that mentioned it at all called it the reweaving, which was accurate in the same limited way that calling a mountain a rock is accurate. Moraine pressed her awareness, not her hands, not her body, something deeper, something that lived in the same place inside her, that the gap in the veil lived into the fracture itself. She felt the Starless One on the other side of it, not as a presence exactly, as an attention. Old, patient, endlessly hungry, in a way that had nothing to do with appetite and everything to do with absence wanting to become total. It noticed her. It always noticed her. After 500 years, she suspected it knew her better than anyone alive knew the shape of her resistance, the specific frequency of her resolve, the precise places where 5 centuries of careful loneliness had worn her thin. It pressed. She pressed back. The fissure in the altar stone began, slowly, to knit. It took 11 minutes. Sorvane counted every one of them, watching her face go pale and then gray, and then the particular shade of white that frightened him more than anything he'd witnessed in his entire career, reading the architecture of dying things. When it was finished, the crack was gone, the altar stone was whole, the wrongness in the air had receded to something distant and contained, like a held breath finally released. Moraine collapsed. Sorvane caught her before she hit the stone floor. She weighed almost nothing. 500 years of carrying the world, and her body still felt like it belonged to a 17-year-old girl who hadn't eaten properly in months. "Moraine, Moraine, look at me." Her eyes opened, dark, exhausted, present. "I'm fine," she said, in a voice that suggested the opposite. "You are not fine. You went gray. You haven't eaten today. When was the last time you slept more than 2 hours?" She tried to sit up on her own and failed, and let him help her instead, which told him more about her actual condition than anything she might have said. "This is what it costs," she said quietly. "Every fracture point. It costs something. I've never told anyone how much because there was never anyone to tell." Sorvane held her there, in the ruined chapel, with the altar stone whole again behind them, and the soldiers waiting outside, and the gray sky pressing down through the broken roof. "Tell me now," he said. And for the first time in 500 years, she did. Chapter 10. What 500 years actually costs. They stayed in Calderhall until nightfall, the soldiers building a fire in the lee of a collapsed wall, while Morin recovered enough strength to sit upright without assistance. Sorvane sat across from her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and listened. She told him about the second fracture point, in a kingdom that no longer existed under that name, sealed in the year a particular king had been crowned, a fact she remembered only because she'd had to attend the coronation in disguise to reach the site without causing a diplomatic incident. She told him about the seventh fracture, the hardest one, which had taken her 4 days and had nearly killed her in a way that even the Undying Verdict struggled to undo, not death exactly, but something close enough that she'd spent a week afterward unable to remember her own name. She told him about the soldiers, all of them. Not the names this time, those she kept for the dark, privately, but the weight of it. Of leading people into battles she knew, with the particular certainty of someone who has fought 1,000 of them, would not end well for everyone involved. Of watching young men and women follow her banner because they believed in something, and knowing that what they believed in was a fraction of the truth, and that the fraction she could tell them was never going to be enough to explain why she made the choices she made. "They think I'm building an empire," she said, staring into the fire. "They think there's a throne at the end of this, a kingdom, something they can be part of." "What is at the end of this?" Sorvane asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "The hollow throne never told me." I asked, and it didn't answer. And I agreed anyway because the alternative was letting my daughter die in the ruins of a village that doesn't exist anymore. Sorvane was quiet for a long time, turning something over in his mind. The knowledge he'd been carrying since the night he read her soul. The bloodline he'd traced through 5 centuries of records, watching a single thread of descent move through history like a stitch holding a tapestry together. Vessin, and Vessin's daughter, and on, generation folding into generation, until it reached a particular Ashvale family, with a tradition of guarding boundaries they didn't fully understand. Until it reached him. He almost told her. The words were right there. "My grandmother, 14 generations removed. You held her for 1 hour, and then you gave her away to save her life. And she grew up loved and safe. And she had children, who had children, who had children. And one of them is sitting next to you right now." He almost told her. "What stops you from telling her?" He imagined her asking, if their positions were reversed. He knew the answer already. If she knew, if she understood that the man beside her carried her own blood in his veins, the careful distance she maintained around everyone would collapse entirely. Because this wasn't attachment to a stranger anymore. This was attachment to family, the most dangerous kind. The kind the Hollow Throne's covenant had been specifically designed to prevent. It would fracture the seal faster than anything else could. So he said nothing. "I think," he said instead, choosing each word carefully, "that you made a choice when you were 17 years old that no one should ever have to make. And then you kept making it, every single day, for 500 years, alone, because no one else was strong enough to help carry it. And I think the people who call you a monster have never once asked themselves what it actually costs to be the reason the world keeps existing." Morin looked at him. The fire cast long shadows across the broken chapel walls. Somewhere outside, one of the soldiers laughed quietly at something another had said, an ordinary, human sound. oddly comforting against the weight of everything they'd just discussed. "You're the first person who said that to me in 500 years, she said. "Then it's overdue." She didn't move away when he reached over and took her hand. She let it happen, let the warmth of it settle into her palm, into the part of her that had spent 5 centuries deliberately starved of exactly this kind of contact. Far beneath them, beneath the chapel, beneath Calderhall, beneath the continent itself, in the prison the first gods had built from their own dissolved bodies, something ancient and starless felt. The warmth of that touch, the way a hand pressed against a window feels the cold of winter on the other side of glass. It had been waiting 500 years for exactly this moment. It pressed against the seal, and somewhere in a fracture point 100 miles to the east, one Moraine had reinforced only 4 years ago, one that should have held for at least another decade. A hairline crack appeared in stone that had been whole an hour before. Chapter 11. The General Who Sold Information. They returned to camp 3 days later to find it had nearly been overrun. Not by an army. Moraine's forces could repel an army, had repelled dozens over the centuries. The logistics of conventional warfare being one of the few problems 500 years of experience had thoroughly solved. This was different, quieter, worse. General Threnna Vask met them at the perimeter, her face carrying the particular gray exhaustion of someone who had spent 3 days managing a crisis she didn't fully understand. "We had an infiltration attempt," she reported. 3 nights ago, someone got past the outer watch and into the officers' quarters before we caught them." "Caught them how?" Moraine asked. "Dead. They killed themselves before we could question them properly. Poison, hidden in a tooth. Professional work." Sorvane felt something cold settle in his chest. "Did they take anything?" he asked. Threnna's jaw tightened. "We don't know yet. We're still accounting for what was in the officers' quarters. But my queen," she said, turning to Moraine, "there's something else. We found a coded letter on the body, half burned, but my code breakers got enough of it. It mentions Calderhall by name, and it mentions you specifically, not as the Black Queen, as Moraine." The camp around them seemed to go very quiet. For 500 years, almost no one had known that name. It belonged to the deal she'd made at the Vale, to the identity the Hollow Throne had given her, not Aera, who had died in Thornwell, but Moraine, who had agreed to carry the world. She had spoken it to fewer than a dozen people across 5 centuries, and most of those people were long dead. "Who sent the letter?" she asked. Her voice had gone very still. The particular stillness Sorvane was learning meant something dangerous was happening beneath the surface. "We don't know, but the recipient address, it's a private courier route. One that, according to our intelligence, has only ever been used by one organization." Threnna hesitated. "The Ashvale priesthood," she said. "My queen, I thought they were extinct." Sorvane felt every soldier in earshot turn to look at him. "They are," he said, his voice level despite the sudden hammering of his heart. "As far as I know, I'm the last one." "Then who sent the letter?" Threnna asked. Nobody answered, because nobody had an answer. Later, alone. Moraine found him an hour later, sitting outside his tent with one of his oldest Ashvale texts open across his knees, staring at a passage he had clearly read 100 times before and was now reading for the 101st. "You think someone survived?" she said. "Not a question. I think it's possible. The priesthood was hunted, not annihilated all at once. There could be a hidden line, someone who went deep enough into hiding that even I never found them. And if there is, what would they want with information about a fracture point?" Sorvane closed the text slowly. "If someone with Ashvale training wanted to make the Starless One wake faster instead of slower," he said, "this is exactly the kind of information they'd need. The locations, the timing, the vulnerabilities in the seal. Why would anyone want that?
I don't know.
But 500 years is a long time to nurse a grudge against the woman everyone calls the Angel of Death. Or he paused against whatever the Starless One promises in exchange for help. Morian sat down beside him. "It's never offered me anything," she said quietly. "Not once, in 500 years. It's only ever pushed. Maybe it offers differently to people who aren't holding the seal shut." They sat together in silence as the camp settled into uneasy evening routines around them. Soldiers checking weapons twice instead of once. Watch rotations doubled without needing to be ordered. "We need to find them before they find the next fracture point," Moraine said finally. "Agreed. I'll go through every Ashvale record I have. There has to be a name, a family line we missed." He didn't say what he was actually thinking, that there was one bloodline connected to all of this that neither of them had fully accounted for. Vessin's descendants. His own family tree, stretching back 5 centuries to a girl on a farmhouse doorstep. If someone had found that thread before, He pushed the thought away. There would be time to chase it properly. Tonight, the camp needed to sleep, and the woman beside him needed rest more than she would ever admit to needing anything. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." "I know you don't need it," he said gently. "Let me anyway." Chapter 12. The Second Fracture and the First Real Warning. The second fracture point Morian had ever sealed 4 years ago, in a kingdom called Ostmere, in the bell tower of a cathedral that had been converted into a granary after the old religion fell out of favor, had reopened. She felt it the moment she crossed back within 100 miles of it, the cold settling into her chest with a wrongness that was different from the ordinary ache of an unsealed fracture. This one had been sealed once already. It shouldn't have been possible for it to break open again so soon. The seals she placed were meant to hold for decades, sometimes centuries. This one had lasted 4 years. "Someone unsealed it deliberately," Sorvane said, kneeling at the edge of the bell tower floor where the granary's wooden boards had been pulled up to reveal stone beneath, cracked in the same wrongly patterned way as Calderhall. "This isn't decay, this is sabotage." Morian's expression had gone hard in a way Sorvane hadn't seen before, not the weariness of Calderhall, not the careful control she usually maintained. Something closer to fury, banked low and controlled. The particular fury of someone who has spent 500 years protecting something and has just watched someone try to tear it apart out of spite or greed or whatever else drove a person to align themselves with the end of everything. "Seal it," she said. "Now, before it gets worse." She knelt and pressed her palms to the stone, beginning the reweaving again, but this time something fought back harder than it had at Calderhall. Sorvane watched her face contort with effort, watched sweat break out across her brow despite the cathedral's cold air, watched her hands begin to shake against the stone. "Something's wrong," he said, watching the fracture widen slightly instead of closing. "Morian, it's resisting more than before." "I know," she gritted out. "It's learning." "Learning what?" "How I do this. It's been studying the pattern for 500 years. Every time I reinforce a seal, it watches. It's getting better at resisting." The crack widened another half-inch. Something in the air around the bell tower began to change a pressure, a wrongness, like the world itself was holding its breath. Sorvane made a decision he would later describe, when he had time to reflect on it, as either the bravest or the most reckless thing he had done in his entire life. He knelt beside her and pressed his own hands against the stone beside hers, and reached for his Ashvale training, the ability to read the architecture of broken things, and instead of simply reading it, he pushed. "What are you doing?" Moraine gasped. "Don't. Let me help." "You don't understand what this costs." "Then let me share the cost." For one terrible, beautiful moment, The two of them knelt together at the edge of the fracture, his Ashvale sight reading the architecture of the seal while her cosmic authority reinforced it. Working in a kind of tandem neither of them had planned or practiced, born entirely out of instinct and desperation, and something neither of them was ready to name yet. The crack began to close, slower than it should have, fighting harder than any fracture Morian had sealed before, but closing. When it finally sealed, both of them collapsed backward onto the granary floor, breathing hard, the cathedral around them gone suddenly, eerily quiet. "That shouldn't have worked," Morian said, staring at the ceiling, chest heaving. "Nobody has ever helped me do that. The Covenant doesn't allow." She stopped. "What?" Sorvane asked. She sat up slowly, looking at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. "The Covenant says attachment fractures the seal," she said slowly. "It never said anything about shared effort breaking it open faster. Maybe the Hollow Throne never anticipated anyone caring enough to try." Sorvane sat up beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Or maybe," he said quietly, "it anticipated exactly this. Maybe this is what the gap was always supposed to be filled with. Not just power, help." Neither of them had an answer for that. The warning. It was carved into the granary wall when they finally rose to leave words that hadn't been there when they'd entered. Scratched into the old wood in a hand that was unmistakably human, unmistakably deliberate. Sorvane read it aloud, his voice tight. "She is the door. Open her, and everything ends. We are coming for the key." Moraine stared at the words for a long time. "The key," she said finally. "Not the door, the key. What does that mean?" She turned to him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't expected to ever see there. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think we're about to find out, and I think whoever wrote that has been watching us a great deal more closely than either of us realized." Chapter 13. The Man Who Hunts the Hunters. 300 miles to the north, in a tower that did not appear on any map of Vaeldreth, a man who had once been called Brother Iskandar of the Ashvale priesthood sat reading the same coded letter that had nearly reached Moraine's camp 3 days too late. He was old, older than his face suggested, which was already old enough, the particular leathered look of someone who had spent decades somewhere the sun did not reach kindly. His eyes were the pale, washed color of someone who had spent a very long time staring at things that should not be stared at. He had been 12 years old when the Ashvale priesthood was hunted to what the histories called extinction. He had watched his teachers burn. He had watched the libraries that held 500 years of accumulated knowledge about the architecture of existence reduced to ash by kings who feared what they did not understand. He had survived by doing what the priesthood's official teachings forbade. He had gone looking for power instead of merely studying it. "The girl failed," he said to the empty room, setting the letter down. "No matter, we have other resources." He rose and crossed to the window of his tower, looking out over a valley that the maps did not record, where a structure older than the kingdoms of Vaeldreth sat half buried in stone, a temple built by something that had worshipped the Starless One long before the first gods had sealed it away. Iskandar had found the temple 40 years ago. He had spent every year since learning to listen to what slept beneath it. It had taught him things the priesthood never had, things about the true nature of the seal, about the gap in the veil, and the woman who filled it, and what would happen to the laws of existence if that gap were ever properly, permanently opened, instead of merely guarded. The priesthood had called the Starless One a horror to be contained. Iskandar had come to understand it differently. "Order is a prison," he murmured, the words he had murmured 10,000 times before, in a voice that had long since stopped questioning them. The gods built a cage and called it the world. "She is the lock. We only need the key." Behind him, in the dark of the tower, something that was not quite a voice and not quite a presence stirred in response the faintest trickle of attention, reaching up through 300 miles of earth and stone, finding him the way it had been finding him for 40 years. It liked Iskander. It found him useful. It had been very patient, waiting for him to become useful enough. Soon, he said, to the dark, to the thing beneath the world, to the only god he had left after the kings burned all his others. Soon, he turned back to his desk, where a second letter waited, one he had not yet sent, addressed to an agent he had placed inside Morian's camp 3 years ago, long before the Ashvale priest named Sorvane had ever arrived, long before any of this had become urgent. It was time to call that agent into action. Chapter 14, Vessin's Line. Sorvane spent 4 days after Ostmere buried in his texts, tracing every thread he could find of surviving Ashvale bloodlines, cross-referencing names against the coded letters fragments, trying to identify who among the priesthood's scattered descendants might have turned toward the very thing they were meant to guard against. He found nothing conclusive about Iskander. The man had buried his trail too well, 4 decades of careful erasure leaving almost nothing behind. But in the course of his search, he found something else, something he had been avoiding looking at directly for weeks, even though he already knew what it would say: the full record of Vessin's line. He had traced it before, in fragments, enough to know that he descended from her, but he had never sat down and read the whole of it. 500 years of names, marriages, births, deaths, an entire family stretching unbroken from a farmhouse doorstep in the snow to his own birth in a hidden Ashvale enclave that no longer existed. Vessin had grown up loved, the records suggested. The couple who found her on their doorstep had raised her as their own, and she had married a blacksmith's son, and she had lived to the age of 71. By all accounts, a woman known in her village for an unusual fierceness in her eyes that nobody could quite explain, given how ordinary and gentle her life had otherwise been. Her granddaughter had married into a family of scholars. 3 generations later, that scholarly line had intersected with a woman who would become one of the founding members of the Ashvale priesthood itself, drawn, the old texts suggested, to the study of boundaries and thresholds with an intensity that her contemporaries found difficult to explain. Sorvane sat back from his desk, the weight of it settling over him slowly. His entire bloodline, his family's strange, inexplicable pull toward the architecture of death and boundaries, the thing that had made the Ashvale priesthood itself feel like destiny rather than choice, all of it traced back to a single woman's decision in the snow, 500 years ago, to save her daughter instead of herself. He hadn't been born into the priesthood by coincidence. He had been born into it because something in Vessin's blood, something passed down from a mother who had become one of the fundamental laws of existence, had been quietly, generationally drawn back toward the boundaries she came from. It made a terrible kind of sense. He thought about Morian's hands shaking against the stone in the bell tower at Ostmere, about the way she'd said nobody has ever helped me do that, with the particular wonder of someone encountering something she'd assumed was permanently impossible. Maybe it wasn't impossible. Maybe it had simply never had the right person try. That evening, he found her at the edge of camp, sitting alone on a fallen log, watching the soldiers' fires burn low in the dark. She didn't look up when he sat beside her. "You found something," she said. "You've had that look for 3 days." He hesitated. This was the moment. He could tell her now, explain everything. The bloodline, the connection, the fact that the man sitting beside her carried 500 years of her own blood in his veins. He thought about what she'd told him in Calderhall, about the covenant, about how attachment fractured the seal, and how the strongest attachment of all the ones she'd spent 5 centuries running from was the bond to her own child. If she knew Sorvane was Vessin's descendant, the careful boundary she maintained wouldn't just crack, It might shatter entirely. I found a partial trail on the Ashvale survivors, he said instead, which was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. Nothing conclusive yet. I need more time. She nodded, accepting it. And he hated himself a little for the lie of omission, even as he told himself it was protecting her. There's something else, she said after a moment. The fracture point that reopened Ostmere. I want to go back through my records. See if any of the others I sealed years ago show signs of the same deliberate sabotage. That's a lot of ground to cover. 500 years of ground, she said, with something that might have been dark humor. I've sealed over 300 fracture points in my lifetime. If even a tenth of them have been compromised the way Ostmere was, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Then we'd better get started, Sorvane said. They worked through the night, by firelight, her memory and his archive cross-referenced against each other, building a map of 300 years of careful, exhausting work that someone Iskandar, though they still didn't know his name yet, was apparently trying to systematically unravel. Chapter 15. The Agent in the Camp. Captain Reyes Dunmore had served in Moraine's army for 11 years. He had risen from a common foot soldier to the command of her personal guard through a combination of genuine skill and a reputation for absolute loyalty that nobody in the camp had ever thought to question. He had saved General Threna's life at the Siege of Brackwater. He had carried wounded soldiers off 3 different battlefields under fire. He had, by every measure anyone in the camp could think to apply, earned his place at the Black Queen's side completely. Nobody knew that 9 years ago, in a moment of grief, so total it had hollowed him out completely, his wife and infant son killed in a border raid that Moraine's armies had arrived at. One day too late to prevent. He had been approached by a stranger in a past tavern 3 kingdoms away. The stranger had offered him something nobody else could. Not gold, not revenge exactly, though revenge had been close to what he wanted at the time. The stranger had offered him a reason. She could have saved them. The stranger, a younger Iskandar, Reyes would later learn, had told him. She has power enough to undo death itself. She does it for herself, over and over, every time she falls. But your wife, your son, she let them stay dead. Doesn't that strike you as strange? That the woman who cannot die would let the people who love her family die so easily? It had not been entirely true. It had been true enough, in the particular way that the most effective lies always are close enough to fact that grief filled in the rest. Reyes had spent 9 years in Moraine's service since that night, rising through her ranks, earning her trust completely, sending careful, infrequent reports north to a tower that did not appear on any map. He had told himself, for years, that he was simply gathering information, that he would never actually act against her. That loyalty to her army and loyalty to the man who had given him a reason to keep breathing could coexist, somehow, indefinitely. The letter that arrived 3 nights after Ostmere told him that indefinitely had run out. It was brief, coded in a cipher he had memorized 9 years ago and never expected to need this urgently. The priest is her blood. Confirm this. If true, the bond will break the seal, faster than anything we could engineer. Do not interfere. Let love do what we cannot. Reyes read the letter 3 times in the privacy of his tent, the candle burning low, his hands unsteady in a way they hadn't been since the day he'd buried his family. The priest is her blood. He thought of Sorvane, quiet, careful, watchful Sorvane, who had arrived to kill the queen and stayed to save her, who sat beside her now at every council, who Reyes had personally seen carry her exhausted body out of a ruined chapel 3 weeks ago with a tenderness that had made half the camp's gossiping soldiers start placing quiet bets on how long it would take the 2 of them to admit what was obviously happening between them. If it was true, if Sorvane really was descended from some child Moraine had given away 500 years ago, Reyes closed his eyes. He thought about his own son, 6 months old. He had held him exactly 4 times before the raid. He remembered each time with a clarity that 9 years had done nothing to dull. He thought about what it would mean to let Iskandar's plan unfold, to do nothing, to simply watch as the bond between Moraine and Sorvane deepened, as it inevitably would now that it had begun, until the seal cracked wide enough for everything beneath the world to finally, fully wake. He thought about whether the man who had given him a reason to keep living had actually given him anything worth keeping at all. He burned the letter. It was not a decision. It was the absence of one, the simple, exhausted refusal to act on instructions he had followed faithfully for 9 years. He told himself he would decide what to do next in the morning. He did not yet know that Iskandar's plans did not require his active participation. They only required his silence. Chapter 16. What the Soldiers Saw. The soldiers of Moraine's army had long ago agreed in the particular way armies agree on things without ever formally discussing them, a difference in the Black Queen since the Ashvale priest had joined them. Nobody could quite name it. She still rode at the front of every column. She still strategized with the same cold precision that had won her 500 years of battles. She still woke in the dead hours before dawn and walked the perimeter of camp alone, the way she always had. But there was something in the set of her shoulders that had changed. Something in the rare moments she allowed herself to laugh. And she did laugh now, occasionally, a low, surprised sound, as if amusement had become unfamiliar enough to startle her. General Threnna noticed it first, the way generals notice everything about the people they're sworn to protect. "He's good for her," she said to one of her lieutenants, watching Moraine and Sorvane across the camp one evening, heads bent together over a map, close enough that their shoulders touched, neither of them seeming to notice or mind. "You think it's wise?" the lieutenant asked. 500 years and she's never let anyone close. Doesn't that strike you as deliberate?" "Everything about her is deliberate," Threnna said, "which is exactly why I think it matters that this isn't." That night, after the camp had quieted, Sorvane found Moraine sitting alone outside her tent, looking up at a sky thick with stars that the Vaeldreth winter made unusually clear. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her. "I don't sleep much," she said. 500 years of habit. The body doesn't need it the way it used to. I just sit and think. And try not to think about the things I'd rather not think about." "Which things tonight?" She was quiet for a long moment. "My daughter," she said finally. "I don't let myself think about her often. It's safer not to. But tonight I don't know. Something about the stars. They're the same stars she would have looked at, 500 years apart, and the sky hasn't changed at all." "Do you know what happened to her? Her life, I mean, after." Moraine shook her head. "I never let myself look. I told myself it was because attachment fractures the seal, and that's true, but it isn't the whole truth. The whole truth is I was afraid. If I looked and saw she'd had a hard life, if I saw that leaving her was the wrong choice, I don't think I could have kept going. And if I saw she'd had a good life, a happy one, I think some part of me would have wanted to go find her anyway. Consequences be damned. So I never looked. 500 years, and I never let myself look." Sorvane sat with that for a long moment, the weight of what he knew pressing against his chest like a held breath. "If you did know," he said carefully, testing the ground beneath the question. "If someone told you, right now, that her life had been good, that she'd been loved, that her line continued, that some piece of her was still walking around in the world today, would you want to know that?" Moraine turned to look at him. Something in his voice must have carried more weight than he intended, because her expression sharpened slightly. The particular attentiveness of someone who has survived 5 centuries by noticing exactly when a question isn't really about what it claims to be about. "Why do you ask it like that?" she said slowly. And there it was, the moment. The choice, again. The same one he'd been avoiding for weeks. He almost told her. He had the words ready, had them ready for weeks, rehearsed in the privacy of his own mind 100 different ways. But before he could speak, a horn sounded from the eastern perimeter of camp, the specific, urgent pattern that meant a rider approaching at speed, alone, carrying news that couldn't wait for morning. They were both on their feet before the second blast finished sounding. Whatever conversation they had been about to have would have to wait. The world, as it so often did, had other plans. Chapter 17, The Rider's News. The rider was a scout named Coraline, half frozen from a hard ride through the night, who half fell from her horse at the edge of camp and had to be caught by 2 soldiers before she could deliver her report. "Ostmere," she gasped, once she'd been given water and a blanket. "The fracture point at Ostmere, it's open again, wide open. We rode past it 3 hours ago, my queen, and the sky above the cathedral was wrong. Just wrong. Like looking through a hole where there shouldn't be one." Moraine went very still. "That's impossible," Sorvane said. "We sealed it. I felt it close myself." "Someone unsealed it again," Moraine said, deliberately. "The same way it was unsealed the first time." She turned to Threnna. "Get the army moving. Full speed. We ride within the hour." "My queen," Threnna said carefully. "That's a 4-day ride at full speed, and the soldiers haven't rested." "Then we ride through the exhaustion, because if that fracture stays open for 4 days, there may not be a Vaeldreth left to defend by the time we arrive." They rode through the night, and the following day, and the night after that, the army pushing itself past every reasonable limit of endurance. Moraine at the head of the column with an expression Sorvane hadn't seen on her before. Not the calm command of 5 centuries of battle, but something closer to fear. He rode beside her on the second night, when the column had finally stopped for a brief rest, and found her standing alone at the edge of the camp, staring north toward Ostmere, as if she could see the fracture from 300 miles away. "You're frightened," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've never seen one reopen this fast," she admitted. "The first time, it took 4 years for someone to undo a seal that should have held for decades. This time, 3 weeks. Whatever's doing this is getting faster, more confident, or more desperate," Sorvane offered. "Maybe they know time is running out for them too." Moraine looked at him. "What do you mean, time running out?" He hesitated, then decided this, at least, was a truth he could share without unraveling everything else. "I've been thinking about the message at Ostmere. We are coming for the key. If they believe I'm the key, if they believe forcing an attachment between you and someone descended from your own bloodline is what breaks the seal fastest, then whoever's behind this has a plan with a timeline. They're not randomly attacking fracture points. They're building towards something specific. Probably soon." Moraine's expression shifted, the careful mask of command cracking just slightly to reveal the exhaustion beneath it. "Then we need to know who they are before they finish whatever they're building toward," she said. "And we need to know now." Chapter 18, Ostmere, again. They reached Ostmere on the 4th day, the army arriving to find the cathedral that had once held a quiet granary, now surrounded by a darkness that pooled like fog but moved with intention, creeping outward from the bell tower in slow, searching tendrils. Villagers had fled the surrounding town days ago. Crops in the fields nearby had withered overnight, the soil beneath them gone gray and cracked despite the wet season. "It's spreading faster than I've ever seen," Moraine said, dismounting at the edge of the affected zone, her breath fogging in air that had gone unnaturally cold. Sorvane felt it too, the particular wrongness that had become familiar to him over the past weeks, but amplified now, insistent, like a held note about to break. "There," he said, pointing toward a group of figures visible at the cathedral's entrance. 6 of them, robed, standing in a loose formation around the doorway, clearly waiting. Moraine's expression hardened. "Ashvale robes," she said. "The old order's ceremonial colors. Someone trained these people, or trained whoever trained them. Iskandar," Sorvane said, the name arriving in his mind with sudden, cold certainty, though he had never met the man and had no proof beyond instinct. "I think his name is Iskandar." "You know him?" "I found a fragment of a record, weeks ago. A name connected to a priesthood faction that went underground rather than disbanding when the kingdoms hunted us. I dismissed it as a dead end. I shouldn't have." The 6 robed figures moved as Moraine's army approached, not retreating, but spreading into a formation Sorvane recognized with a chill, an old Ashvale containment circle, the kind designed to hold something in, or, inverted, to help something break out. "They're not trying to stop us," Moraine said, breaking into a run toward the cathedral. "They're trying to finish before we reach them." What followed was chaos of the particular, controlled kind that only existed in battles where one side understood exactly what was at stake and the other did not. Moraine's soldiers engaged the robed figures at the cathedral's perimeter, while she and Sorvane pushed through toward the bell tower itself, where the darkness pooled thickest and the wrongness in the air had become almost a physical pressure against the skin. One of the robed figures broke from the formation to intercept them, a young woman, barely 20, her eyes carrying the same washed, pale quality Sorvane would later learn was the mark of someone who had spent too long listening to something that should never be listened to. "You cannot stop what's already begun," she said, her voice carrying an eerie, layered quality, as if more than one voice spoke through her at once. "The door wants to open. It has wanted to open since the first gods made the foolish mistake of closing it." "Stand down," Moraine said, and there was something in her voice that made even Sorvane take an involuntary step back. 500 years of absolute authority condensed into 2 words. The young woman did not stand down. She lunged instead, a blade in each hand that Sorvane recognized, with a sick lurch of understanding, as Ashvale ceremonial weapons designed not to kill flesh, but to sever the threads that connected a soul to existence. Designed, specifically, to do to a person what Sorvane's own gift could do. He moved without entirely deciding to, placing himself between the blade and Moraine, his hand closing around the young woman's wrist with a speed his Ashvale training had given him and years of careful restraint had never required him to use until now. He felt her soul beneath his grip, frayed, exhausted, carrying the particular damage of someone who had been listening to the Starless One's whispers for years, without the training to protect herself from what that listening cost. "I don't want to hurt you," he said. "It doesn't matter what you want," she said, and the layered voice beneath her own grew louder, hungrier. "It only matters what opens the door." She twisted free of his grip with strength that shouldn't have belonged to a body that frail, and in the half-second it took him to recover, she had already turned the second blade toward herself. He didn't reach her in time. She fell, and where her blood touched the cathedral stones, the darkness pooling from the bell tower surged forward eagerly, as if it had been waiting for exactly this kind of offering. "Moraine, now!" Sorvane shouted. "Whatever you're going to do it now!" She was already moving, already pressing her hands to the cathedral's central stone, already beginning the reweaving with a desperation that made the air around her crackle with effort. Chapter 19. What the Door Wanted. For the first time since she had agreed to the Hollow Throne's terms 500 years ago, Moraine felt the Starless One reach toward her directly, not as a pressure against the seal, not as the distant pulling sensation she had learned to recognize and resist, but as an attention, focused entirely on her, vast and ancient and patient in a way that made 5 centuries feel like the length of a single held breath by comparison. It did not speak in words. It had never needed words. It spoke in the absence where words should be, in the particular silence that exists in the half-second after a candle is extinguished, before the eyes adjust to the dark. And in that silence, Moraine understood, with sudden and total clarity, what it actually wanted. Not destruction, precisely. Destruction was simply the byproduct of what it actually sought, which was to remember itself completely, to return to the state that had existed before the first gods decided that something rather than nothing was worth building. It did not hate the world. It simply did not believe the world should exist, the way a person might not hate a house built on land they considered rightfully theirs, while still believing, with total conviction, that the house needed to come down. It had been waiting 500 years for the gap in the veil to widen enough to let it remember itself fully. And it had just discovered something it found very interesting indeed, that the woman holding the gap shut had, after 5 centuries of perfect isolation, finally let someone close enough to matter. It showed her something then, not a vision exactly, but an understanding, arriving fully formed in the part of her mind that the veil had always had unrestricted access to. It showed her what would happen if she let herself love Sorvane completely, not metaphorically, literally. It showed her the seal cracking, fracture point by fracture point, faster than she could ever hope to reinforce them. As her own heart, the thing she had kept so carefully starved for 500 years, finally, fully opened. It showed her the world ending, not in fire, not in any of the dramatic, comprehensible ways that the old religious texts described. It showed her the world simply ceasing to have been, the way a word ceases to exist the moment you stop remembering it, the way a dream dissolves the instant you wake and try to hold on to it. And underneath the threat, underneath the horror of it, she felt something that frightened her more than the vision itself. It wasn't lying. Moraine, Sorvane's voice, somewhere outside the vision, urgent, frightened. Moraine, stay with me. Whatever it's showing you, it isn't real. Stay with me. She forced her way back to her own body, gasping, her hands still pressed to the cathedral stone, the fracture beneath them only half closed. It knows, she said, her voice raw. It knows about you, about us. It's been watching this whole time, and it's pleased. Sorvane, it's pleased. Then we finish this anyway, he said, kneeling beside her, pressing his own hands to the stone alongside hers, exactly as he had at Ostmere weeks before. We finish it, and we figure out the rest after. You don't understand. It showed me if we let ourselves. I don't care what it showed you, he said, and his voice carried a fierceness she hadn't heard from him before. It is a thing that has spent eternity trying to convince itself that nothing is better than something. Of course, it wants you to believe that love is the thing that ends the world. It needs you to believe that, because the alternative is that love is the thing that's been holding the world together this entire time, and it cannot stand that possibility. Moraine stared at him. Seal it, he said, with me. Right now. Let's find out which one of us is right. And together, hands pressed to ancient stone, the two of them pushed back against something that had existed before the concept of pushing back had been invented, and slowly, agonizingly, the fracture began. Once more, to close. Chapter 20. Reyes makes a choice. Reyes Dunmore watched the battle at the cathedral's perimeter from the relative safety of the supply line, ostensibly coordinating the wounded, but in truth, using the chaos as cover to think. He had burned Iskander's letter 3 weeks ago. He had told himself that was enough, that silence was a kind of resistance, that simply refusing to confirm what Iskandar wanted confirmed was as far as his conscience required him to go. Watching Moraine and Sorvane kneel together at the cathedral's heart, pouring themselves into sealing a fracture that should never have reopened in the first place, he understood with sudden, sick clarity that his silence had never been enough. Iskandar didn't need his confirmation anymore. He had simply watched and waited and let the bond between the queen and the priest develop on its own, exactly as he'd predicted it would. Exactly as the cathedral's fracture and the dying acolyte and everything else tonight had been designed to accelerate. Reyes thought about his wife, about his son, 6 months old, 4 times held. He thought about the stranger in the tavern 9 years ago, offering him a reason to keep breathing in exchange for a kind of complicity he had told himself, for 9 years, was small enough not to matter. He thought about Moraine, who had led him into 100 battles, who knew his name and the names of every soldier who had ever served beneath her banner, who had once sat with him for an entire night after Brackwater, after he'd lost 3 men under his command, and had not said a single word, had simply sat with him in the dark until he was ready to speak again. He thought about what kind of man let something like that be destroyed, because grief, 9 years ago, had made him desperate enough to believe a stranger's careful lies. He stood up from the supply line and walked, with sudden and total purpose, toward General Threnna, who was directing the wounded with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "General," he said, "I need to speak with you immediately. It's about the Queen. I have information that I should have given you 9 years ago, and I am about to give it to you now, and I expect you to do whatever you need to do to me once I have." Threnna looked at him for a long moment, reading, perhaps, something in his face that told her this was not a small confession. "Talk," she said, and Reyes Dunmore, for the first time in 9 years, told the truth. Chapter 21. The Truth, finally. Threnna came to Moraine that night, after Ostmere's fracture had been sealed, and the camp had finally settled into uneasy rest, her face carrying an expression Moraine had learned, across 5 centuries, to recognize as the precursor to very bad news. "My queen," Threnna said quietly, drawing her aside from the others. "Captain Dunmore has confessed something. I think you need to hear it directly from him." And I think she hesitated. "I think you need Sorvane there when you do." They gathered in Moraine's tent an hour later. Threnna, Reyes, Sorvane, Moraine herself, the air thick with the particular tension of people about to learn something that would not be easily unlearned. Reyes told it all. The tavern, 9 years ago. The grief. The stranger who had given him a reason to keep living in exchange for careful, infrequent reports. The letter, 3 weeks ago, that had finally made him understand what he had actually been complicit in. "The priest is her blood," he said, his voice breaking slightly on the words. "That's what the letter said. Confirm this. If true, the bond will break the seal faster than anything we could engineer. Do not interfere. Let love do what we cannot." The tent went very quiet. Moraine turned to Sorvane. He had known this moment would come eventually. He had simply never imagined it arriving like this secondhand, through a confession he had no chance to prepare for, in front of witnesses, with no opportunity to choose his own words. "Is it true?" she asked. Her voice was very steady, too steady. The particular steadiness of someone holding something enormous very carefully in place. Sorvane held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "I've known for weeks. Since the night I first read your soul in your war tent, before I understood what the gap in the veil actually meant. I traced the bloodline, Vessin, her children, generation after generation, down to my own family. I'm her descendant, which means you're mine," Moraine finished, very quietly. She asked Threnna and Reyes to leave. They did, quickly, the tent flap falling closed behind them, leaving Moraine and Sorvane alone with 500 years of careful distance collapsing in real time between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Because I knew what it would do to you. I knew the covenant. I knew that attachment to a stranger was dangerous enough, and attachment to your own blood to proof that the daughter you left was loved." That her line continued, "That some piece of her is sitting right here in front of you. I knew that would be different, worse, or better, depending on how you measured it, but either way, more dangerous to the seal than anything else could be. So you decided for me," she said. "You decided I couldn't handle the truth, and you made that choice on my behalf, the same way everyone in 500 years has decided things on my behalf because they thought they understood what was best for me better than I did." Sorvane flinched at that, because it landed exactly where she'd intended it to. "I was trying to protect you. I have been protecting myself for 500 years, she said, her voice rising for the first time since he'd known her. "I don't need anyone else to do it for me. I needed you to trust me with the truth. Instead, you decided I was too fragile to carry one more piece of weight on top of everything else I've carried alone since I was 17 years old." She turned away from him, her shoulders rigid, and he understood, with a sinking certainty, that he had made exactly the mistake he'd been trying to avoid, not by telling her the truth too soon, but by withholding it, by making the same choice everyone else in her life had made, deciding what she could and couldn't handle without ever asking her. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should have told you the moment I knew. I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is I was protecting myself too. I didn't want this to change anything between us. I didn't want you to look at me differently, like I was a piece of your past, instead of someone choosing to stand beside you now." Moraine was quiet for a long moment. "Does it change anything?" she asked finally, still not turning around. Sorvane crossed the tent and stood behind her, close but not touching, giving her the space to decide whether she wanted him closer. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I know that I chose to stay before I knew. I know that everything I've felt for you since Calderhall was real, and it didn't come from some sense of obligation to a bloodline. I came to kill you, Moraine. I stayed because of who you actually are, not because of what blood we happen to share." She turned to face him then. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I think the question isn't whether it changes anything. I think the question is whether you can let yourself love someone who's connected to the daughter you gave up 500 years ago, knowing what the Hollow Throne's covenant says that kind of love will cost. That's your choice to make, not mine. I should have given you the chance to make it weeks ago." Moraine looked at him for a long time, the firelight from outside the tent casting shifting shadows across both their faces. "She had your eyes," she said finally, very quietly. "Vessin, when I held her for the hour, I had her. She had eyes that looked like they already understood something the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. I see it in you sometimes. The same look." Something in Sorvane's chest tightened. "I'd like to tell you about her," he said. "Everything I found in the records. If you want to know." Moraine closed her eyes. "I've been afraid to know for 500 years, she said. "I think I'm done being afraid." And so, in the quiet of her tent, with the camp settling into sleep around them and a fracture point 300 miles away still humming faintly with the memory of what had almost broken through, Sorvane told her about Vessin, about the farmhouse, about the blacksmith's son she'd married, the children she'd raised, the particular fierceness in her eyes that her village had never quite been able to explain. Moraine cried for the first time in 500 years. It did not feel like weakness. It felt, after 5 centuries of careful control, like something finally being allowed to exist. Chapter 22. Into the Mountains. With Reyes's confession came a location, the rough coordinates of a tower that did not appear on any official map of Vaeldreth, hidden in a valley north of Ostmere where, According to the careful records of 9 years of intercepted correspondence, Iskandar had built his sanctuary above the ancient temple he had spent 4 decades listening to. "We move at first light," Moraine said, gathering Threnna and her senior officers in her tent the following morning. "Full strength. If Iskandar is preparing something, a final attempt to break the seal completely, we end this before he has the chance." "My queen," Threnna said carefully, "if this temple is built above an actual connection point to the Starless One, we may be walking directly into the most dangerous ground in all of Vaeldreth." "I know," Moraine said. "That's exactly why we're going." They rode north for 2 days, the landscape growing steadily wilder and stranger the closer they came to the hidden valley trees that grew in shapes no natural wind could explain. Streams that ran in directions that defied the slope of the land, a quality of silence that pressed against the ears the way pressure presses against the body deep underwater. Sorvane rode beside Moraine for most of the journey, the two of them having reached, since the night of her confession, a new kind of closeness, not without its tensions, not without the lingering awkwardness of trust that had been damaged and was still being carefully rebuilt, but real nonetheless, deeper than before, for having survived the breaking. "What happens if we find Iskandar and he refuses to stop?" Sorvane asked. On the second night, as they sat together near the edge of camp, watching the unnatural trees sway in a wind that smelled faintly of something with no name. "Then we stop him," Moraine said simply. "I've ended threats to the seal before. I'll end this one too." "And if it's not that simple? If he's gone far enough into whatever the Starless One has been teaching him that there's nothing left to save?" Moraine was quiet for a long moment. "Then I do what the Hollow Throne made me to do," she said. "I hold the seal, whatever the cost. Even if the cost is a man who used to be Ashvale, who used to believe in protecting the world the same way you do." Sorvane reached over and took her hand. The gesture had become easier between them, more natural, in the weeks since Calderhall, though it still carried weight every time. "Whatever happens up there," he said, "we face it together. No more secrets. No more deciding things for each other because we think we're protecting one another. Agreed?" "Agreed," Moraine said. Far beneath them, in the dark beneath the mountains, something ancient and starless felt them approaching, and began, with the patience of a being that had waited since before time existed, to prepare a welcome. Chapter 23. The Temple Beneath the Tower. The tower itself was unremarkable old stone, narrow windows, the kind of structure that might have belonged to any minor noble fallen on hard times. It was what lay beneath it that announced, the moment Moraine's forces crested the final ridge into the valley, that they had arrived somewhere the ordinary rules of the world no longer applied. The temple was visible, even from a distance, a structure half sunk into the earth. Its architecture, unlike anything built by human hands, angles that seemed to shift slightly when viewed directly, as if the building itself resisted being fully perceived. Iskandar was waiting for them at the temple's entrance, alone, his pale, washed eyes calm in a way that unsettled Sorvane more than any show of force could have. "You found me," Iskandar said, as Moraine's army assembled at a wary distance. "I confess, I expected it would take longer." "The girl who has your blood," he added, looking directly at Sorvane, "was meant to do that gradually, patiently. I underestimated how quickly the two of you would find your way to each other regardless." "Stand down," Moraine said. "This doesn't have to end badly for you." "It already has ended badly for me," Iskandar said, almost gently. "It ended badly for me 40 years ago, when I watched the kingdoms burn everything I was ever taught to value in the name of a fear they never bothered to understand. I am not your enemy, Moraine. I am simply someone who stopped believing the cage was worth defending." "The world isn't a cage," Moraine said. "It's everything. Every life that's ever been lived. Every person who's ever loved someone, built something, mattered to someone else. You'd trade all of that for what? Oblivion? Nothing? Not nothing, Iskandar said. Truth. The Starless One doesn't lie the way the gods did. It doesn't promise order and deliver suffering instead. It simply is what it is. I find that, after everything, more honest than anything the so-called civilized kingdoms ever offered me. He raised his hands, and the ground around the temple entrance began, slowly, to open. Not physically, exactly, but in the way that the fracture points had opened, a wrongness spreading outward from a central point, the air itself beginning to fray at the edges. I won't fight you for the world's sake, Iskandar said. I've spent 40 years preparing for this, and I have no illusions about my chances against you directly. But I don't need to defeat you, Moraine. I only need the door to open wide enough, for long enough, for what's beneath to finish remembering itself. And the door, he said, his pale eyes shifting to Sorvane, opens widest through love. So thank you, priest, for doing my work for me. He stepped backward into the temple, and the ground beneath Moraine's feet began to shudder. Chapter 24. What Love Actually Costs. Inside the temple, the architecture defied every law Sorvane's Ashvale training had ever taught him to expect. Walls that curved in directions that shouldn't have been geometrically possible. A central chamber that seemed, the longer he looked at it, to be larger on the inside than the tower above could possibly contain. At its center, a fissure in the world itself, not stone this time, not an altar or a granary floor, but a tear in the fundamental fabric of existence, wide enough that the wrongness pouring from it had become almost a physical wind, cold and starless and ancient. Moraine approached it with Sorvane at her side, and for the first time since he had met her, he felt her hand find his and grip it tightly, not for comfort exactly, but for something closer to bracing the particular grip of someone preparing to face the worst thing she had ever faced. "It's stronger here," she said, her voice tight. "This close to the source. I can feel it trying to..." She stopped, gasping, as the fissure widened slightly, responding, it seemed, to her very presence. And then it spoke not in words, never in words, but in the particular silent pressure that Sorvane had felt once before, at Ostmere, amplified now beyond anything he had imagined possible. It showed them both, simultaneously, the same vision it had shown Moraine weeks ago, the world unraveling, the seal cracking, everything ending in the particular quiet way that things end when they are finally allowed to stop existing. But this time it showed them something more. It showed them what it actually was, underneath the horror, underneath 500 years of pressure against a seal it could not break alone. It showed them loneliness so vast and so total that the concept of loneliness, as humans understood it, became almost laughably inadequate to describe it. It had existed before anything else existed. It had been alone since before aloneness had a name. And when the first gods built something light, warmth, the world, life it had felt, for the briefest moment, the possibility of not being alone anymore. And then they had sealed it away instead. Moraine's voice, when she spoke, was raw with something that sounded almost like grief. "It's not trying to destroy us," she said slowly, the understanding arriving in real time. "It's trying to stop being alone. It thinks ending everything and returning to before is the only way it knows how to do that, because the alternative is being shut out of everything, forever, the way it has been for longer than time has existed." Sorvane felt the weight of that land in his chest, not because it excused anything, not because loneliness, however vast, justified the unmaking of an entire world, but because he understood, suddenly and completely, what Moraine had been carrying for 500 years, in a way he hadn't fully grasped until this exact moment. She had spent 5 centuries deliberately starving herself of exactly the thing the Starless One had never been allowed to have: connection, warmth, the simple, ordinary miracle of being known by someone and choosing, despite everything, to stay close to them anyway. She had built her own loneliness as a wall against the world ending, and it had never had to be that way. "It showed you that loving me would break the seal," Sorvane said slowly, working through it as he spoke. "But what if that's not actually true? What if what it showed you was a fear dressed up as a vision because the actual truth is more dangerous to it than any fracture could ever be?" "What truth?" Moraine asked, her hand still gripping his, the fissure pulsing ominously before them. "That love isn't a weakness in the seal. It's the thing the seal was always missing. The first gods built a prison out of pure law, out of rules and boundaries and absence. They never built it out of anything warm. Maybe that's why it's been fracturing for 500 years, no matter how perfectly you reinforce it. Maybe a wall built only of law was always going to crack eventually. But a wall built of law and love together." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Moraine looked at the fissure, and then at him, and something in her face shifted. 500 years of careful, deliberate isolation finally, fully releasing. "I have spent 500 years afraid of exactly this moment," she said. "Afraid that if I let myself love anyone completely, I would be the reason everything ends." But I think she looked at the fissure, at the vast, lonely thing pressing against the boundary of the world. "I think I've had it backward the entire time." She turned fully to Sorvane, and for the first time since the night in the bell tower at Ostmere, she let every wall down completely. "I love you," she said. "Not despite what it costs, not carefully, not at a safe distance, not held back the way I've held everything back for 5 centuries. I love you completely, and I am done being afraid of what that means." And she kissed him, there, at the edge of the fissure, with the Starless One's vast and ancient loneliness pressing against them from the other side of everything. The fissure did not widen. It began, instead, slowly, impossibly, to close. Chapter 25. The Hollow Throne's Answer. Iskandar, watching from the temple's edge, felt something he had not expected to feel in 40 years. The cold, creeping shock of discovering that everything he had built his life around might have been built on a fundamental miscalculation. "That's not possible," he said, more to himself than to either of them. Attachment fractures the seal. The covenant is explicit. The letter, the texts. "The covenant was written by something that wanted me afraid," Moraine said, stepping back from the closing fissure, Sorvane's hand still in hers. "The Hollow Throne never lied to me, exactly. But it let me believe the worst version of the truth, because the worst version kept me isolated, kept me weak, kept the seal dependent entirely on my strength, instead of something it could never fully account for." "And what's that?" Iskandar asked, his voice carrying, for the first time, genuine uncertainty. "Love, freely given," she said. "Not obligation, not duty, not a desperate bargain struck to save a dying child. Though that's where this began for me. Something chosen, completely, without fear of the cost." The fissure closed completely as she spoke, the temple's wrongness receding, the air growing warm again for what Sorvane suspected might have been the first time in 40 years. Iskandar sank to his knees, the weight of 4 decades of careful, devoted preparation collapsing around him in the span of a single sealed fracture. 40 years, he said quietly. 40 years. And it was never going to work. Not the way I thought. "It's not too late," Moraine said, approaching him slowly. "You watched everything you believed in burn, and you found something to fill the hole that left. That doesn't make you irredeemable. It makes you someone who's been alone with the wrong kind of company for a very long time." Iskander looked up at her, his pale eyes carrying, for the first time since they had arrived, something that might have been the ghost of the boy who had watched his teachers burn 40 years ago and had simply wanted, in the wreckage of everything, to find a reason that made the world make sense again. "What happens to me now?" he asked. "That depends on you," Moraine said. "There's a priesthood worth rebuilding, knowledge worth recovering that the kingdoms burned out of fear instead of wisdom. You could spend the rest of your life helping undo some of what's been broken instead of finishing what you started here." It was not forgiveness, exactly. It was something more practical, and in its own way, more generous an offer of purpose, extended to a man who had spent 4 decades believing purpose and destruction were the same thing. Epilogue, 501 years. The Hollow Throne. When Moraine finally returned to the Vale months later, not through death this time, but through the particular meditative state the old Ashvale texts called the Quiet Crossing, answered, at last, the question it had refused to answer 5 centuries before. "What happens when the work is finished?" she asked, the white silence of the Vale pressing in around her exactly as it had on the night she died in the ruins of Thornwell. "The work is never finished," the Hollow Throne said, in the wordless way it had always spoken. "The seal will always need tending. The starless one will always press against the boundary. This is the nature of holding something back instead of destroying it outright. It requires vigilance forever, because some things cannot simply be ended. They can only be carried." "Then what was the question for?" she asked. 500 years ago. What happens when the work is finished? You never answered it. "Because the honest answer," the Hollow Throne said, "was always going to be, nothing changes, except who carries it and how. You were alone because you believed you had to be. You believed the covenant required total isolation, because that is the assumption you arrived with a girl who had been abandoned by everyone she trusted, choosing to abandon connection before it could abandon her first. I never corrected that assumption. I let you believe what kept you safest, by your own definition of safety, for as long as you needed to believe it. And now?" "Now," the Hollow Throne said, something that might have been warmth threading through its ancient, wordless voice. "You know better. The seal holds, Moraine. It will always need tending. But it no longer needs to be tended alone." She returned to the world to find Sorvane waiting exactly where she had left him, exactly as he had promised he would be. "Well?" he asked. "The work is never finished," she said, settling beside him. "But I don't have to do it alone anymore. I never did. I just needed 500 years and someone stubborn enough to refuse to leave before I figured that out." Outside, the camp had begun to stir with the ordinary business of morning soldiers checking weapons, cooks tending fires, the particular comfortable noise of an army that had, for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, gone an entire season without losing a single soul to the war they fought against something most of them would never fully understand. Somewhere far to the north, in a tower that no longer needed to hide, a man who had once been called Iskandar sat with old texts and the slow, patient work of rebuilding something he had once tried to help destroy. And somewhere beneath the world, in the dark, something ancient and vast, and no longer quite so alone, settled, for the first time in longer than it could remember, into something that almost resembled peace. Not gone, never gone. Some things cannot simply be ended, but held, gently, by more than one set of hands. And that, it turned out, after 500 years of carrying the world alone, was enough. 500 years, 347 fracture points, every battle, every death, every name she carried in the dark, all of it for one condition: her daughter lives. And she did, and her blood survived, and he found her, and the seal held. Because love freely given, without fear of the cost, turned out to be the thing the seal was always missing. If this story moved you, if you stayed all the way to the end, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell me your favorite moment, your favorite character, the line that hit different. Your words are what keeps stories like this alive. Like this video if she earned it. Share it with someone who needs a story that hits this hard. And subscribe because the next story is already in progress, and it is coming for you the same way this one did. The Black Queen does not die. She made a deal with something older than death, and so did I with every person who found this channel. I will keep bringing the stories. You keep showing up. Welcome to Crimson Vellum. Thank you for being here. Until the next one.